Tonight, we journey back to an era where the threshold of adolescence met the tumultuous grandeur of ancient Rome, a period often described as the magnificent catastrophe of youth. Here, the mantle of adulthood descended at the tender age of 13, and personal style was less about tailored garments and more about sheer fabric draped with an audacious spirit. If you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. I'm curious where you're listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Should these chronicles of antiquity capture your imagination, consider marking this journey with your affirmation and joining our growing community of fellow explorers. We invite you to share your unique vantage point by noting your location and current time in the comments below. It is always a profound pleasure to witness the global tapestry woven by our shared curiosity. The existence of a Roman adolescent commenced amidst the quintessential hallmark of the eternal city, an incessant cacophony potent enough to rouse specters from their slumber. Long before Helios extended his first golden rays across the distant horizon, the metropolis had already declared an unyielding assault upon any hope of repose. What shattered the pre-dawn stillness first? The vociferous admonitions of your neighbor directed at his obstinate mule. The reason this particular equine harbored distinct convictions, which it articulated with resounding fervor, its hooves clattering defiantly on the cobblestones as daybreak approached. Your eyes remained yet unopened, and already an intrinsic understanding settled upon you. This day would unfold in the characteristic Roman fashion, a blend of unpredictable pandemonium and subtle disillusionment. Should your lineage be one of opulence, your awakening would occur within a villa of such exquisite splendor that even the deities might cast envious gazes upon its intricate mosaic artistry. Yet, do not surrender too readily to comfort. This magnificent, open-air architectural design concurrently rendered your dwelling essentially a formidable wind tunnel, albeit one adorned with costly embellishments. Your personal attendant would rouse you with a delicate tap upon the shoulder, their demeanor betraying the resigned apathy of one whose aspirations had long since faded. They might murmur of siblings, a number sufficient to form a minor legion. Your sleeping pallet, meanwhile, comprised mere straw, and the true herald of morning was invariably your brother, who had just dislodged from his portion and landed squarely upon your face. Outside, the rooster's shrill crow pierced the air, while your neighbor, with characteristic Roman zeal, was already embroiled in a dispute over bread prices. In that moment, the fervent desire to invent the contemporary door, solely to barricade against the incessant din, would grip you with undeniable force. Next, the distinctive aroma of Rome would assail your senses, a potent concoction mingling the rich scent of olive oil, the earthy warmth emanating from ceramic jugs, the woven fibers of baskets, the worn leather of sandals, the metallic tang of your father's working implements, and the unmistakable presence of at least one feline, utterly unyielding in its refusal to stir, convinced, in its own lofty estimation, that it was a lesser divinity. Then, as though orchestrated by an unseen conductor, the city's volume would escalate yet another notch. Street vendors, with stentorian cries, would hawk fresh fruit, their shouts serving not as a gentle awakening, but as an abrupt summons. The clamor would seize you, pulling you toward the central chamber of your dwelling, still lingering in a state of semi-slumber, and already harboring a nascent irritation toward the nascent day. Beyond the threshold, the thoroughfares vibrated with the full-throated roar of burgeoning life. But within your home, your family was already engaged in preparing entaculum, the Roman morning meal, a repast possessing the nutritional allure of a bland, unadorned wall. For those of affluent lineage, your morning meal might comprise bread sweetened with honey, an assortment of dried fruits, briny olives, and perhaps a modicum of cheese. In essence, it amounted to the sort of light refreshment your prosperous relative would ceremoniously present as exquisitely delicate and refined, though in truth, it offered scarcely more than a fleeting nod to actual nourishment. The household slaves would present the food, their expressions stoic, bearing the resigned wisdom of individuals keenly aware that discontent would surely follow, regardless of the dishes offered. If your origins lay with a more humble family, your breakfast would be notably simpler, indeed, starkly so. It would consist merely of bread, often coarse and hardened, the variety of bread that, if propelled with sufficient force, possessed the potential to inflict lasting psychological distress. One might attempt to soften it with diluted wine, the Roman approximation of a practical expediency. Yet its flavor would invariably echo with the bitter tang of regret, subtly underscored by vinous notes. And concerning wine, it is true that Romans consumed diluted wine in the early hours. This practice stemmed not from an endeavor to achieve inebriation before midday, but rather from the fact that Rome's available water possessed the dubious character of a stagnant, unsanitary pool. The youth of Rome would partake of this attenuated wine, considering it a form of hydration. In stark contrast, contemporary parents often experience considerable alarm if their offspring consume an excessive quantity of caffeine. The familial unit would convene around the communal table, which was, in essence, merely a rough plank of timber making a rudimentary pretense at being proper furniture. Your paterfamilias would already be engrossed in discourse concerning political machinations, impending taxes, or the recent peculiar glance received from a neighboring citizen. Your materfamilias, meanwhile, would be orchestrating the entire day within her mind. The meticulous household cleaning, the observance of ritual obligations, the procurement of provisions, and the perpetual necessity of admonishing you to maintain decorum in public, an unending endeavor in itself. As a privileged adolescent, your breakfast would be consumed while a household slave stood in attendance, clasping your footwear, patiently awaiting your completion to assist with fastening the intricate sandal straps. If your circumstances were more modest, your mother would likely hurl your sandals across the room with the impressive precision of a seasoned centurion, and then you would step forth, the fading scent of breakfast, predominantly bread, olives, and a faint residue of mild disappointment trailing behind you, as the full olfactory assault of Rome struck you directly. The air would be thick with the sizzling of street food, the meandering presence of various animals, the cries of one vendor proclaiming fresh fish, countered by another's shout declaring the first a liar, and a beggar engaged in a spirited debate with a pigeon. The morning meal concluded, sustenance procured, Rome lay in wait, and predictably, its clamor had already intensified within the societal constructs of ancient Rome. The concept of a teenage phase was non-existent. There was no gentle, gradual passage from the carefree days of childhood into the responsibilities of maturity. Rome perceived a 13-year-old as a nascent senator, albeit one devoid of any accompanying stipend. One did not mature into adulthood, rather, one was propelled into it with the abruptness of a soldier cast into the fray of battle before his morning repast was even concluded. This transition commenced with the solemn toga ceremony. One dawn would find you a child, unfettered and barefoot, and the next, you would be enveloped within the voluminous folds of the toga virilis, a monumental, weighty, and excessively theatrical drapery, signifying to the populace your new status as a respectable adult. This occurred even as your mind remained firmly preoccupied with the question of available refreshments. Your family, nonetheless, radiated with pride. Your father would offer a congratulatory pat on your back, while your mother subtly dabbed away tears. You, meanwhile, would be singularly focused on avoiding an embarrassing stumble before a significant portion of the forum, thus averting your designation as the central figure of Roman rumor for the ensuing decade. For a girl, the weight of expectations descended with even greater intensity. One morning might see you engrossed in play with effigies crafted from remnants of wool, only for your mother to declare, the very next, sweetheart, it is time to deliberate upon domestic administration, and your prospective spouse, even as your mind continued to wrestle with the intricacies of yesterday's lesson concerning the craft of spinning fibers. Rome held no creed in the individual quest for self-discovery. Instead, the eternal city subscribed to the principle of identity bestowal. Were you the progeny of a baker? Then, felicitations, your destiny lay in the baking trade. Were you the daughter of a merchant? Superb. Your path now involved the study of accounting, irrespective of personal inclination. And the Roman populace harbored a profound affection for responsibility. So deeply ingrained was this fondness that they would imbue you with duties, even before you could adequately comprehend the very notion of responsibility itself. Young men were anticipated to equip themselves for careers in politics, the art of rhetoric, and potentially military enlistment. Girls, conversely, were instructed in the intricate operations of running a household, managing financial affairs, overseeing domestic staff, and ideally sidestepping any form of public scandal, a feat considerably more arduous in Rome than it might outwardly appear. Every action you undertook was subjected to scrutiny. Your bearing, your decorum, the precision of your Latin grammar, your attire, even the manner in which you met another's gaze in public. Rome was a metropolis populated by practiced purveyors of gossip. Everyone held an opinion, and none were expressed with any degree of subtlety. Even your leisure pursuits were subject to surveillance. Engaged in reading, commendable. Indulging in gambling, unacceptable. Lingering too long in contemplation of gladiators. That, of course, depended entirely upon who might have observed you. Rome did not patiently await your maturation. Instead, it vociferously demanded immediate adulthood, and this expectation was unequivocally public for a Roman adolescent boy. Your existence was now accompanied by an assigned vestment, the toga virilis. To categorize it merely as a uniform would be an act of profound leniency, for in its practical application, it manifested as a cumbersome, unwieldy, and defiantly uncooperative monstrosity of fabric, appearing to be purposefully fashioned to induce public stumbles. The initial donning of this attire would instantly illuminate why every sculpted Roman figure seemed burdened with an air of perpetual tension. The instant you ventured outdoors, the toga commenced its gradual transmogrification into an ungainly bedsheet possessed of a personal grievance. It would invariably slip from your shoulder, coil treacherously around your legs, and attempt to constrict your throat during unexpected gusts of wind. Should it graze the ground, immediate soiling was assured. For Rome was a city characterized by dust, pandemonium, and a profusion of enigmatic fluids, one emphatically wished to avoid on one's garments. Yet, you would don it regardless, for its very presence declared to the world, "I am now a man." This declaration stood firm, despite your tender age of 13 and your ongoing inability to manipulate the toga without resembling someone grappling with a mythical marine beast. Now, having been officially recognized as a man within Roman society again, at 13, your obligations would begin to accumulate with a rapidity rivaling the stacking of amphorae in a bustling wine merchant's establishment. Your father would forthwith determine it propitious for you to cultivate the art of disputation on all manner of subjects: politics, poetic verse, architectural principles, or even the questionable aesthetic of your friend's recent coiffure. All, to his mind, constituted entirely legitimate subjects for deliberation. Following your scholastic duties, you might accompany your father to the Forum, that vibrant, pulsating core of Rome. There, you would observe the practical application of political machinations, senators delivering falsehoods with unwavering conviction, merchants vociferously haggling over prices, and public orators gesticulating with such dramatic flourish that they risked inadvertently striking passing standards. Your father would murmur conspiratorially, "One day, this will be your domain." Meanwhile, your internal contemplation would be, "One day, I simply hope to master the art of ambulating gracefully within this cumbersome toga." Furthermore, you were expected to embody certain virtues, specifically Roman fortitude and rigorous discipline. This encompassed the conditioning of your physique, the practice of maneuvers with wooden swords, and the acquisition of the marching cadence of a diminutive, yet earnest legionary. The life of a Roman adolescent boy was anything but leisurely. It constituted a relentless marathon of formidable expectations, all symbolically enshrouded within cumbersome fabric. Yet, a small consolation often existed. Your sandals, for the most part, offered a degree of comfort. For a young woman in ancient Rome, existence did not gradually unfurl, rather, it clicked into rigid alignment with the abrupt finality of a snared trap. One moment, you might be a child, innocently absorbed in play with effigies crafted from remnants of wool. And the next, your mother would declare, "Dearest, it is time to deliberate upon domestic administration," and your prospective spouse, even as your mind continued to wrestle with the intricacies of yesterday's lesson concerning the craft of spinning fibers. Your day would commence at an exceedingly early hour, well before the arrival of dawn. This was because, in the estimation of Roman mothers, while the presence of sunlight might be considered a dispensable luxury, productivity was an immutable imperative. Your awakening would be accompanied by the clamor of the thoroughfare, vendors' shouts, dogs' barks, and the predictable clang of a dropped amphora for the third successive morning. Following this, the unmistakable cadence of your mother's voice would intercede, serving as a crisp reminder that the responsibilities of adulthood would not, by their own accord, arrange themselves. Your duties would commence without delay. You would assist with the intricate processes of weaving and spinning, the meticulous cleaning of the household, the preparation of daily meals, and the perpetual, demanding cycle of Roman laundry. Given that Roman garments were predominantly wool, the unyielding nature of this fiber ensured its inherent recalcitrance. You would laboriously stir vast receptacles of heated water, vigorously scrub persistent stains, wring tunics by hand, and silently ponder the precise number of deities one might need to propitiate in order to hasten the invention of a future washing apparatus. In the event of your family's prosperity, your day would also encompass the oversight of household servants and the acquisition of skills necessary for hosting refined dinner parties, gatherings, where guests meticulously assessed the seating plan, the culinary seasonings, the flow of discourse, the aesthetic decor, and quite possibly your very presence. Your mother would instruct you in the delicate art of maintaining a polite smile, whilst simultaneously performing complex mental calculations to optimize the household's fiscal allocation. She would further impart the critical wisdom of how to circumvent familial disgrace, an endeavor that in Rome constituted a full-time profession, given that public scandal was essentially a cherished urban spectacle. Should your family's means be meager, your burden of labor would effectively double. You would assist in managing the family's market stall, transporting heavy amphorae that often outweighed your own person, engaging in negotiations with merchants who uniformly believed themselves to be unparalleled comedic intellects, and vigilantly pursuing your younger siblings to prevent them from inadvertently igniting something. Compounding all these obligations, you were moreover anticipated to prepare for the institution of marriage. By your 13th or 14th year, your parents would already be meticulously evaluating prospective husbands, wealthy, advantageous, from a reputable family, even better, breath redolent of fermented anchovies, unfortunate, yet deemed tolerable. Love. What was this enigmatic emotion? A theme confined to Hellenic verse, perhaps, or a prohibitive luxury, attainable only by the most exceptionally affluent. Roman girls were quickly indoctrinated into navigating a patriarchal society, one constructed entirely by men, convinced of their superior understanding of everyone's welfare. Your mother would impart the true, unspoken wisdom, the art of negotiation, the judicious oversight of finances, and the subtle mastery of directing the entire domestic sphere without any male member of the household ever discerning that you were, in fact, orchestrating every detail. Indeed, etiquette was paramount. You would assimilate the proper methods of sitting, standing, formally saluting senators, courteously presenting items, and rigorously avoiding social transgressions, such as interjecting inappropriately or sporting unsuitable footwear at a public festival. Your existence was a rigorous, meticulously structured, yet profoundly chaotic and ceaselessly occupied affair. And all of this unfolded at the tender age of 13. Rome afforded no gentle space for maturation. It merely presumed you had already attained it. Education in ancient Rome bore no resemblance to the tranquil, scholarly refuge envisioned by contemporary minds. Absent were hushed classrooms, gleaming corridors, or motivational placards urging one to reach for the stars. Instead, Roman schooling transpired outdoors, in the bustling public sphere, amidst unadulterated pandemonium. It was akin to endeavoring to absorb philosophical concepts in the very heart of a vibrant farmer's market. Your scholastic day commenced upon your arrival at the ludus, which was fundamentally a modest area situated proximate to a thoroughfare or a bustling marketplace. Your instructor, the literator, would already be present, his countenance bearing the timeless expression of one perpetually questioning why the celestial powers had condemned him to a profession involving adolescence. Your fellow students would convene around the literator, each equipped with a wax tablet, a pointed stylus, and an attention span comparable to that of a slightly over-caffeinated squirrel. The street's clamor was relentless. Children darted past, merchants shouted about the merits of olives, and an errant canine would invariably wander in, electing your wax tablet as its personal plaything. Despite this pervasive distraction, your teacher would command absolute, unwavering focus. Your curriculum encompassed reading, penmanship, and rudimentary arithmetic. This might appear straightforward, were it not for the concurrent instruction in both Greek and Latin, a pedagogical choice by the Romans, seemingly designed to inflict academic rigor upon their youth from two distinct linguistic fronts simultaneously. You would meticulously practice forming letters upon your wax tablet, often reciting phrases loudly and with conviction, perhaps gesticulating with your arms, confident that such dedication would ensure success in any endeavor. You would commence practicing concise speeches, formal introductions, elementary debates, and impassioned recitations of poetic verse. Your instructor would stress that each line demanded a delivery imbued with sufficient fervor to sway the venerable Senate itself. Simultaneously, your personal struggle would involve merely attempting to resist distraction by the fishmonger engaged in a boisterous dispute with a customer mere paces away. Should your family's resources permit, you would subsequently advance to the tutelage of the grammaticus, the more specialized instructor. Under their guidance, you would delve into Greek literature, historical accounts, geometric principles, and the artful mastery of delivering an insult, employing appropriately Homeric lexicon. You would discern the subtle distinctions between grammatically correct expression, elegantly refined grammar, and that particularly egregious form of grammar capable of provoking even the spectral wrath of Cicero himself. Instructors were, naturally, exceedingly severe. They imposed order with a rod that possessed its own appellation, a veritable stick of discipline. Yet, remarkably, this was not the most unsettling aspect. The profoundest terror stemmed from the ceaseless anticipation that you would mature into an articulate, courteous, and socially impeccable Roman citizen, one who would emphatically avoid disgracing the entire household by stumbling over their toga during a public address. Roman education was a clamorous, exacting, and tumultuous affair, yet learning undeniably transpired. This was because, in ancient Rome, schooling was not an elective pursuit. It was an indispensable preparation for an existence lived entirely in the public eye. And Rome, ever vigilant, was perpetually observing. By the time you attained adolescence in ancient Rome, the city had already conveyed one immutable truth with unequivocal clarity. Your value now lay in utility. Not charm, not nascent development, not exploratory self-discovery, but sheer usefulness. This utility manifested in tasks such as scrubbing floors, laboriously transporting water from a distant public fountain, meticulously preparing vegetables, tending to livestock, weaving textiles, sweeping expansive courtyards, and conscientiously endeavoring not to inhale excessive dust as your brother vigorously aired rugs from the balcony, as if conjuring a localized sandstorm. Laundry, hearty felicitations. You were now enlisted to assist. And Roman laundry was not mere laundering, it was a pitched battle. Garments were submerged in large vats, trampled underfoot, rigorously scrubbed with stiff brushes, rinsed, manually twisted to expel water, and finally suspended to dry in a manner that invariably entailed every family member issuing contradictory instructions at once. And precisely when you believed your duties were concluded, your mother would materialize, bearing yet another basket, her demeanor resembling that of an exhausted bull. For a girl, your period of apprenticeship unfolded entirely within the domestic sphere. You would master weaving, spinning, culinary arts, household budgeting, the meticulous management of provisions, and the venerable Roman practice of maintaining a polite smile, whilst discreetly resolving the multitudinous problems of everyone around you. Irrespective of your social stratum, Rome anticipated your active contribution. Adolescents were not regarded as decorative embellishments. They constituted a functional component of the labor force. Their social existence was a boisterous, an inherently dramatic affair. Rome was not a city fostering serene, quiet alliances. It was, rather, a metropolis where bonds of camaraderie were forged amidst pervasive tumult. Your companions were those with whom you shared childhood, neighbors, schoolmates, familial relations. This included the boy who once cast an amphora into a public fountain, cleverly attributing the transgression to a passing dog, and the girl whose negotiating prowess outstripped that of half the Senate. Collectively, you constituted a veritable minor legion of adolescent vigor, navigating the thoroughfares of the empire's capital. Rome served as your playground, though by playground one must understand a perilous, congested, and entirely unsupervised obstacle course. You would deftly weave between bustling carts, evade wandering stray dogs, elude unanticipated pools of dubious liquid, and expertly circumvent merchants who evidently considered vociferously reprimanding adolescence a cherished pastime. You would rendezvous with your companions in the forum, at the public baths, or by the closest food vendor purveying bread, olives, or savory garum-soaked delicacies. Street food formed your very sustenance. You and your friends would partake of these provisions, while engrossed in discussions of paramount adolescent importance. Which gladiator possessed the greatest charisma, whether your rhetoric instructor was secretly afflicted by a curse, and who had witnessed a senator's recent ignominious stumble over his toga. Games constituted a significant element of Roman youthful existence. You would engage in ball sports within constricted courtyards, partake in board games using knucklebones, and devise a myriad of tumultuous tag variations, featuring rules utterly incomprehensible to any adult. Young men might engage in wrestling or simulated combat. Indeed, few activities better epitomized camaraderie than the endeavor to grapple a friend into the dust. Young women, conversely, socialized through weaving gatherings, animated gossip sessions, and sporadic instances of subtle defiance, such as the discreet rolling of eyes when adults mistakenly believed their attention was elsewhere. The public baths served as the preeminent gathering place. Even adolescents too impecunious to afford a substantial meal would meticulously preserve a coin or two for admittance. Within, you would perspire in the stifling caldarium, splash vigorously in the frigid plunge pool, exchange hushed gossip, boast about your private tutors, lament your household duties, and adopt the pretense of sophisticated adults, all while actually comporting yourselves as boisterous teenagers, convinced the pervasive steam concealed your every secret. Given Rome's inherent abundance of regulations, surreptitious excursions became practically obligatory. Adolescents would stealthily absent themselves to observe chariot races during training sessions, to listen to street performers hone their comedic acts, or to discreetly watch gladiators engaged in their preliminary exercises. Each such sortie transformed into a covert operation, replete with hushed, dramatic whispers and sporadic, frantic sprints when circumstances veered awry. Bonds of friendship in Rome were ardent, steadfast, boisterous, and indelibly etched in memory. For in maturing within a city that ceaselessly bustled, clamored, and judged, one naturally gravitated toward those who comprehended your particular brand of youthful pandemonium. To experience adolescence in ancient Rome signified, above all, a singular truth. Your attire harbored a singular, malevolent intent to undermine you. Roman fashion was not merely raiment. It constituted a perpetual skirmish between yourself, the immutable force of gravity, the intractable fabric, and the looming specter of public mortification. In this perennial conflict, gravity invariably emerged victorious. Let us commence with the plight of young men. You would awaken, don your basic tunic, and then confront the principal sartorial challenge, enveloping yourself within the toga virilis. This was a vestment so theatrical, so ponderous, so superfluously voluminous, that it could conceivably serve as an emergency circus canopy. The toga possessed precisely two primary objectives in its existence. Firstly, to symbolically announce your accession into adulthood, and secondly, to deliberately cause you to stumble before a person of considerable import. No Roman sculpture ever depicted the candid reality. The toga would invariably shift its position. It would crease incorrectly. It would, with uncanny volition, develop an independent temperament. Should even a gentle breeze arise, all semblance of control was lost. You would find yourself engaged in a full-body wrestling match with a vast sheet of fabric, all while the entire city observed your predicament. Senators managed to present an image of elegance because their retinues of slaves meticulously readjusted their togas every 10 minutes. You, conversely, were merely an adolescent, desperately striving not to succumb to an ignominious collapse into a shapeless, fabric-wrapped burrito. Young women contended with their own distinct sartorial tribulations. They donned the stola and the palla, both ostensibly graceful garments. In practical application, however, these were lengthy, weighty, and appeared resolutely intent on snagging upon any adjacent piece of furniture, door frame, or even a wandering caprine. You would meticulously arrange your hair into intricate coiffures, demanding a minimum of 3 pins, 2 fervent supplications, and the legendary patience of Jupiter himself. And despite all such diligent effort, a single gust of wind could effortlessly render you the unwitting architect of a novel local hairstyle. Accessories were not a matter of choice. Jewelry served as a clear declaration of your family's prosperity, or its absence, to anyone within a considerable proximity. Earrings, bracelets, brooches. Romans possessed the acquisitive nature of magpies, coupled with an intense social ambition. Should you be affluent, your adornments would include gold and iridescent glass beads. If of humble means, your accoutrements would consist of bone, clay, or whatever trinket your uncle had bartered for at the marketplace, ideally unburdened by any malevolent enchantment. Then there was footwear. Sandals, naturally, eminently practical during the summer months, merely tolerable in spring, and utterly lamentable in winter. Their straps, without fail, would invariably snap at the most inopportune junctures always. This typically occurred precisely when you were striving to maintain an air of composure, or when it became imperative to traverse a dubious puddle, one whose origin unequivocally was not precipitation. And remember, Rome itself was an inherently critical entity. The entire city functioned as one vast, continuous runway. Every aspect, including one's attire, imbued with political significance and the potential for personal animosity, stepping beyond the confines of your Roman home. As an adolescent was akin to entering a sprawling, live-action obstacle course, seemingly conceived by the gods solely for their own amusement. The thoroughfares of Rome were not thoroughfares in the contemporary understanding. They were vibrant, living entities, boisterous, capricious, theatrical, and utterly resolved to cause you to stumble, drench you, disorient you, or even persuade you to embrace a novel faith before the midday meal. The instant you emerged into the open air, the city would seize you by your tunic, jolting you into full wakefulness. Vendors would already be bellowing as though vying in a contest to shatter your auditory membranes. Fresh bread, fresh fish, fresh falsehoods. You would swiftly apprehend that every commodity in Rome was hawked with resounding volume, unwavering conviction, and confrontational directness of gaze. The pervasive aromas would next assail you. Each street corner possessed a distinct olfactory signature. Each corner scent was unequivocally candid. Traversing these streets constituted a demanding athletic endeavor. Initially, you would skillfully evade carts drawn by donkeys, creatures utterly devoid of deference for foot traffic. Subsequently, you would nimbly sidestep mendicants, street performers, wandering canines, and children darting about with the frantic energy of overstimulated lizards. The cobblestones were perpetually irregular, the alleyways constrictive, and a significant portion of the populace was perpetually engaged in vociferous altercations with the other half. You would navigate past the myriad shops that lined the thoroughfares, diminutive establishments teeming with fervent activity. Bakers would extract steaming loaves from roaring ovens. Blacksmiths would hammer metal with a resonant clang that caused one's very soul to reverberate. Barbers would openly attend to customers in plain public sight, and tavern keepers would issue enticing propositions that subtly hinted at guaranteed future regret concerning the libations. Street entertainers were ubiquitous. Musicians would pluck at lutes, poets would declaim verses with the self-assuredness of individuals who had never encountered public disapproval, and acrobats would attempt daring somersaults that prompted your mother to murmur quiet prayers. Some possessed genuine talent, others merely boundless enthusiasm. Often, one would dramatically dart out of their path, later feigning complete absence of fear. You would also routinely encounter patrolling soldiers, mobile affirmations that Rome was a formidable, highly organized, and ceaselessly observant power. They offered no smiles, no salutations. Their gazes were piercing, as though you were perpetually a single, awkward toga-induced misstep away from becoming mere administrative documentation. And yet, notwithstanding the pervasive disorder, the assaulting aromas, the incessant clamor, the recurrent near-fatal encounters, and the perpetual hazard of inadvertently slipping into some enigmatic substance. The thoroughfares of Rome were exhilarating, intensely vibrant, fraught with peril, utterly indelible. And for a Roman adolescent, they constituted your entire cosmos. Should there be any single thing Roman adolescents cherished more profoundly than lamenting their domestic duties, it was festivals, and ancient Rome boasted an abundant profusion of such celebrations. So numerous were they that one might occasionally ponder if the entire empire was perpetually one meager harvest away from devolving into a perpetual year-long revelry, punctuated only by intermittent tax levies. Roman festivals were boisterous, tumultuous, joyous, audaciously unrestrained, and notably deficient in formal regulations, a combination inherently captivating to adolescents. Consider, firstly, the absolute absence of adult oversight. You would adorn yourselves in vibrant garments, vociferate unrestrainedly in the thoroughfares, and consume such copious quantities of confectionaries as to inspire genuine inquiry into whether the gods themselves had devised the affliction of diabetes. Then came the Lupercalia, a celebration that contemporary parents would, without question, unequivocally forbid. Adolescents would congregate to observe semi-clad priests hurtling through the city streets, striking individuals with strips of goat hide in rituals intended to promote fertility. You would feign ironic detachment in your observation, yet deep within, you recognized that every peer found it simultaneously uproarious, anarchic, and subtly disquieting. The Floralia constituted another favored event, a vernal festival, abundant with blossoms, spirited dancing, dramatic theatrical productions, and individuals behaving with theatrical flair, despite maintaining complete sobriety. Young women adored it for the sartorial displays. Young men found delight in it for reasons they would fervently disavow when questioned by their parents. Each festival invariably featured an array of food stalls, various performers, lively musical accompaniment, and the quintessential ancient Roman iteration of carnivalesque pandemonium. You would roam the thoroughfares with your companions, savoring honey cakes or roasted nuts, as itinerant magicians executed feats of legerdemain that, though undoubtedly involving trickery, remained thoroughly captivating nonetheless. You would witness actors performing boisterous comedies, their masks so grotesquely exaggerated as to potentially infiltrate your slumbering thoughts. Acrobats would execute daring flips, musicians would play with fervor, and people would dance with uninhibited exuberance. Rome, in these moments, transformed into an expansive recreation ground. Yet festivals did not constitute its sole source of amusement. The Colosseum and its various amphitheaters served as powerful magnets for adolescents. Your father might declare their profound cultural significance. You, however, would steadfastly maintain your interest lay solely in the strategic intricacies. Then there was the Circus Maximus, the revered arena of chariot racing, the ancient world synthesis of Formula One speed with the brutal intensity of mixed martial arts. Adolescents would fervently select their favored teams, paint emblematic symbols upon their sandals and shriek themselves hoarse as horses thundered around the track at breakneck velocity. Victory imbued a sense of profound triumph. Defeat was felt as a deeply personal affront. If you envision public spaces where individuals conversed in hushed tones and luxuriated in serenity, then I extend my felicitations, for you have clearly never experienced Rome. The public bathhouse, in stark contrast, represented the very pulsating core of Roman social existence, a boisterous, congested, humid, and utterly tumultuous environment. Yet inexplicably, it remained everyone's preferred locale for communal gathering. For a Roman adolescent, the baths were the quintessential venue for social interaction. You and your companions would not utter, "Let us convene later." Rather, the directive would be, "Meet me at the baths," for quite frankly, what other viable destination existed? The thoroughfares were fraught with peril. The forum teemed with adults embroiled in incessant disputes, and your home invariably held a multitude of duties poised to waylay you. The baths alone offered neutral ground, a veritable sanctuary of pervasive steam and vibrant rumor. Admission was inexpensive, accessible even to less affluent families. You would tender a modest coin, step across the threshold, and instantly be enveloped by an oppressive wave of heat, a sensation more jarring than the reprimand from your rhetoric instructor after an inaccurate quotation of Homer. Within, the complex unfolded as a labyrinthine sequence of chambers, the apoditerium, serving as the changing area, the tepidarium, a room of moderate warmth, the caldarium, the intensely heated chamber, and the frigidarium, the invigorating cold plunge. Each offered a distinct sensory encounter. However, this frequent occurrence was met with a collective pretense of it being an intrinsic aspect of the bath's peculiar charm. Subsequently, you would proceed into the warm chamber, allowing your body to acclimatize, joining approximately 50 other individuals who had arrived at the identical intention. The hot room, the caldarium, was where the true alchemy occurred. The steam was so dense that your own hands became barely discernible. Middle-aged men would vociferously engage in political discourse. Your hair would instantly succumb to frizz. Your skin would become moisturized, irrespective of your conscious desire. Then arrived the cold plunge, the Roman equivalent of a perilous challenge. You would leap in, emit an internal shriek, and endeavor to avert collapse from shock, all while your companions, reveling in amusement at your expense. The water was colder than the disapproving expression your mother reserved for instances of attempted sarcasm. Between these immersive experiences, you would consume light refreshments, engage in lively conversation, lament your scholastic woes, admire the gladiatorial imagery carved into the walls, and maintain a facade of nonchalance while discreetly observing attractive individuals from a distance. The bathhouse was the sole refuge where adolescents could truly unwind, engage socially, and momentarily feign that the onset of adulthood was not hurtling toward them with gladiatorial velocity. The baths transcended mere hygiene. They offered therapeutic solace, fostered community, represented the ancient Roman equivalent of an uncontrollable chariot, and from their embrace, there was unequivocally no evasion. Your family's esteemed honor superseded your personal comfort, individual sentiments, nascent aspirations, or the undeniable reality that your toga was, at that very moment, attempting to incapacitate you. For a young man, your father would convene a solemn discussion, not the contemporary iteration, enjoining you to study legal principles, master rhetoric, meticulously observe the forum, and cease your slouching, as the neighbors might take notice. He would then gesticulate theatrically towards the horizon, as if the deities themselves were recording his pronouncements. Your mother would listen attentively nearby, nodding in a manner suggesting her endorsement of your prospective curriculum vitae. She would underscore that your comportment, how you ambulated, conversed, dined, greeted others, and even merely respired in public, was a direct reflection upon the entire household, demanding the calculated precision of a nascent senator. For a young woman, the burden of expectation was considerably more acute. Your mother would assume oversight of your instruction with the same rigorous dedication as a general preparing a commander. You were obliged to master the seamless and efficient administration of a household, encompassing budgeting, the supervision of domestic staff, weaving, meticulous cleaning, the organization of provisions, guest management, the observance of religious ceremonies, and the crucial task of ensuring the family possessed sufficient olive oil to endure the forthcoming decade. And then came marriage. Matrimony was not a romantic expedition. It was a strategic alliance, a meticulously crafted long-term scheme, and the ancient Roman embodiment of the plea, please, do not bring shame upon us. Your parents would meticulously strategize concerning familial alliances, dowry negotiations, and which prospective husband carried the least burdensome burden of disreputable gossip. You would sit in quiet compliance, nodding politely, while an internal scream echoed within you. This was Rome, not because adolescents lacked rebellious inclinations, they certainly possessed them, but because defiance invariably culminated in a 3-hour harangue on the tenets of honor, sacred duty, ancestral legacy, the mighty Jupiter, and the precise reasons why your conduct might precipitate an agricultural drought. Rome did not merely rear its adolescents, it forged them under the relentless crucible of pressure, beneath the weight of profound expectations, and always beneath the scrutinizing gaze of the entire community. For all its intricate political machinations, its ceaseless clamor, and its dubious effluvia, ancient Rome nonetheless possessed one immutable universal truth. Its adolescents invariably harbored dramatic infatuations, potent enough to energize an entire amphitheater. Love in Rome was a tumultuous, inconvenient, exhilarating, perilous, and utterly inescapable force, mirroring every other aspect of this formidable city. Let us commence with the fundamental truth. Roman adolescents were prone to swift infatuation. You might cast a glance across the forum, observe someone adjusting their toga without an embarrassing stumble, and instantly become convinced that the gods had bestowed upon you a divine omen. Or you might discern an individual at the baths, their hair impeccably coiffed, or at least not utterly ravaged by the steam, and your heart would unequivocally declare this to be fate. Never mind that no verbal exchange had ever transpired. Such details, you believed, could be addressed later. Your companions, naturally, offered no mitigating influence. Indeed, they would champion every audacious notion. You absolutely must engage them in conversation. You should compose a poetic verse for them. You ought to feign needing navigational assistance, despite having recited your entire life. Adolescent Romans, it seems, were adept at inventing ill-advised counsel long before the advent of the internet. As a young man, your efforts to captivate your object of affection would involve carefully honed techniques, such as loitering awkwardly in their vicinity, gesticulating with excessive theatricality during conversations in which they played no part, or maintaining a stoic facade as your toga threatened to constrict your breath. You might even attempt to pen a brief poetic verse, drawing inspiration from Ovid only for the final rendition to resemble a grocery ledger infused with nascent sentiments. For a young woman, matters were considerably more intricate. You could not simply approach an individual and offer a direct greeting. Such an act would be deemed scandalous. Instead, you would cultivate mastery of the sideways glance, a subtle, strategically deployed, and devastatingly effective maneuver. You would traverse the market, passing one another, meticulously feigning disinterest while, in truth, meticulously observing every detail. Shy smiles would be exchanged as your respective mothers passionately debated the cost of vegetables. Love letters did exist, though they were not furtive folded notes exchanged beneath school desks. Rather, they comprised wax tablets inscribed with declarations of dramatic ardor, such as, "Your beauty glows with a brilliance surpassing Vesta's sacred flame," documents which, it must be stressed, your parents absolutely ought not to discover. For Rome was the undisputed global epicenter of gossip. A confidence entrusted to a single friend by sundown would circulate throughout the entire vicinage, with senators, bakers, and likely even the stray canines all harboring opinions on your nascent, often imagined romance. And yet, love, against all odds, endured. It persisted despite societal strictures, despite parental admonishments, despite the inherent recalcitrance of the toga. For even in a city consumed by notions of duty and honor, Roman adolescents discovered avenues to experience every emotion with profound intensity, to hope, to dream, to engage in awkward flirtation, and to envision futures vastly exceeding the confines of their familial residences. In Rome, affection was not a private affair. It was, rather, a form of public art, a dramatic spectacle to find your passion or figure things out. Rome firmly believed such pursuits belonged exclusively within the confines of Greek philosophy classrooms, not within the practical realities of one's personal existence. You were anticipated to embark upon adulthood with the self-assuredness of one who possessed complete competence, notwithstanding the undeniable reality that you harbored no such certainty whatsoever. For a young man, the arrival of adulthood was heralded by an abrupt impact. Suddenly, your father would lead you to the forum, commencing introductions to individuals you had never encountered, yet were inexplicably expected to impress. Senators, merchants, magistrates, all would dispense unsolicited counsel. One might clap your shoulder, declaring, "You must uphold Roman virtues," to which you would politely nod, even as an internal tremor of panic seized you whenever your toga fell incorrectly. Your future presented a vast array of responsibilities: law, political office, military enlistment, or the assumption of the familial enterprise. And just as you imagined yourself prepared to select your course, adults would interject with reminders of additional duties: venerating ancestors, preserving family honor, sidestepping public disgrace, executing astute financial judgments, and, naturally, one day producing heirs. No pressure, indeed. For a young woman, the intensity of adulthood was amplified. You did not merely step into responsibility, you were propelled into it with a sudden leap. You were anticipated to administer a household with the exacting precision of a military commander, managing domestic staff, allocating resources judiciously, organizing religious observances, preparing repasts, hosting guests, overseeing textile production, and maintaining a graceful smile through every domestic crisis the family might encounter. And then there was matrimony. Marriage was not a romantic expedition. It was a strategic alliance, a meticulously crafted long-term scheme, and the ancient Roman embodiment of the plea, "Please, do not bring shame upon us." Your parents would meticulously strategize concerning familial alliances, dowry negotiations, and which prospective husband carried the least burdensome burden of disreputable gossip. You would sit in quiet compliance, nodding politely, while an internal scream echoed within you. This was Rome. Not because adolescents lacked rebellious inclinations, they certainly possessed them, but because defiance invariably culminated in a 3-hour harangue on the tenets of honor, sacred duty, ancestral legacy, the mighty Jupiter, and the precise reasons why your conduct might precipitate an agricultural drought. Rome did not merely rear its adolescents, it forged them under the relentless crucible of pressure, beneath the weight of profound expectations, and always beneath the scrutinizing gaze of the entire community. Yet, here lies the unexpected truth. As formidable as the demands of adulthood were, Roman adolescents adapted. They met the challenges presented. Indeed, they would quietly lament their burdens. Indeed, they would experience internal surges of panic. And indeed, they would, at times, secretly wish Jupiter would grant them a moment's reprieve. But Rome, in its essence, molded you. Its pervasive clamor fortified your spirit. Its formidable expectations honed your capabilities. Its inherent tumult prepared you for an existence lived with pride within the preeminent city of the world. You were no longer merely an adolescent. You were a Roman, an adult within the vast empire. Prepared or not, Rome continued its relentless advance, and you, perforce, marched in lockstep during the 12th century. Europe inadvertently conceived one of the most peculiar cultural innovations of its entire medieval span, courtly love. This intricate system posited that to fall passionately, hopelessly, and in a mathematically catastrophic manner for an unattainable individual was not a moral lapse, but rather a sophisticated display of emotional prowess. Rather than simply adhering to the commandment against adultery, medieval aristocrats devised an ingenious circumvention. One might intensely adore another, yet rigorously abstain from any physical intimacy. This elevated romance into a philosophical sport, replete with codified rules, elaborate rituals, and a disconcertingly high volume of poetic verses penned by men who, in all likelihood, had not partaken in ablutions since the preceding Easter. At the very core of courtly love resided the principle of impossibility. The archetype of the beloved lady was almost invariably a married woman, typically wed to a powerful and considerably older man, the sort of individual who regarded poetic expression as suspiciously Gallic, and thus inherently perilous. Yet, this inherent impediment was not a flaw within the system. It was its very driving force. A love already possessed could never attain true nobility, a love that remained perpetually out of reach. That was the very essence of perfection. Medieval bards steadfastly maintained that the most pristine form of affection was that which remained perpetually unconsummated, the kind that elegantly tormented you as you meticulously composed verses about a woman who, quite possibly, was entirely unaware of your existence. This peculiar romance demanded a rigorous performance. The knight was not, under any circumstances, to physically seduce the lady. Such an act, indeed, would be considered boorish. Instead, he was expected to venerate her as if she were an angelic being, the very moral compass guiding his soul. He might bear her favor into battle, a ribbon, a glove, or, on occasion, a scrap of fabric she was assuredly unaware he had purloined. He would declare his unwavering devotion to her through song, in the midst of tournaments, and even in the direct presence of her husband, who, regrettably, was often the very patron sponsoring the chivalric contest. The lady, too, had her prescribed function. She was anticipated to inspire virtuous conduct, gently admonish the knight's transgressions with refined severity, and rebuff his overtures with sufficient elegance to intensify his adoration. Her fundamental role, in essence, was to embody unattainability, all while maintaining a convincing pretense of valuing his devoted endeavors within a societal framework where aristocratic women wielded restricted direct authority. This peculiar romantic construct inadvertently bestowed upon them a novel form of influence, the capacity to compel men to compete, to endure hardship, to strive for self-improvement, or to succumb to mild, poetic derangement. Thus, from its very inception, courtly love transcended mere physical expressions of affection, clandestine encounters, or furtive assignations behind castle ramparts. It was fundamentally about profound yearning, a weaponized form of longing, a socially sanctioned heartbreak, exquisitely refined, intellectually more profound than Aristotelian philosophy, and ostensibly endowed with an emotional acumen capable of transforming a savage knight into a paragon of gentlemanly conduct through a mere glance. In actuality, the lady was typically a pragmatic, politically astute woman, adept at administering estates, forging matrimonial alliances, overseeing household economics, navigating pregnancies, and contending with the sporadic eruption of plague. However, medieval poets were not concerned with depicting genuine women. Their verses celebrated the lady, a chimerical being who subsisted almost entirely within their creative fancy, and occasionally manifesting in their saddlebags as an embroidered handkerchief. The act of idealization was intensely dramatic. Poets would depict their chosen lady as an individual whose sublime beauty possessed the power to assuage divine wrath, whose radiant smile could subdue ferocious lions, and whose melodious voice could mend grievous injuries. Actual aristocratic women, meanwhile, were engaged in the far more mundane task of ensuring the year's grain harvest remained safe from brigandage. Yet, within this romanticized fantasy, the woman assumed the role of a divine power, a muse, an arbiter, a fount of spiritual illumination. Her purpose was less to be a human entity than a potent symbol. The lady also evolved into an exceptionally convenient pretext. Knights would assert that their increased valor in combat stemmed not from a desire for martial glory or plunder, but solely from her inspiring presence. Their courage, their refined manners, even their personal grooming, all were ostensibly in devoted service to a woman they were expressly forbidden to touch. Should a knight behave in a reprehensible manner, poets would vehemently contend it was due to the absence of a guiding lady. If his conduct was exemplary, it was unequivocally attributed to the inspiration bestowed by a noblewoman. Medieval women were, it seemed, accountable for every facet of existence save for meteorological phenomena. However, life on this elevated pedestal harbored its own disadvantages. An aristocratic woman, finding herself venerated by a knight who was not her spouse, navigated a precarious tightrope. Should she provide excessive encouragement, she risked accusations of infidelity. Were she to reject him too severely, she would transgress the strictures of courtly etiquette. Her duty was to delicately rebuff his advancements, yet simultaneously permit the continuation of the emotional theatrics that ignited his poetic endeavors. Conceive of this as the medieval analog to enduring a tenacious admirer while meticulously preserving one's reputation, with the notable distinction that this admirer arrived clad in chainmail, passionately reciting florid metaphors concerning your eyebrows. Nevertheless, despite its inherent absurdity, this idealization conferred upon noble women an unforeseen degree of social gravitas. In a societal structure that seldom permitted women direct authority, being elevated to an idealized position, even one purely conceptual, possessed the power to subtly incline the world, however marginally, in their favor. While the aristocratic woman was elevated to a symbolic pedestal, the medieval knight positioned himself in a far less dignified stance, typically upon his knees, pledging unending fealty to an individual capable of terminating the entire elaborate charade with a mere arch of an eyebrow. Within the framework of courtly love, the knight's devotion transcended casual admiration. It constituted a full-time emotional vocation, replete with intricate rituals, solemn pledges, and a degree of theatrical suffering that contemporary audiences would undoubtedly categorize as uncompensated performance art. The knight's journey commenced with the selection of a lady, ideally one who was married, of higher social standing, and as utterly unattainable as humanly conceivable. This inherent impediment was not a defect, but rather a fundamental characteristic. Should affection prove too readily acquired, it forfeited its nobility. A married woman guaranteed that the knight's ardor remained remote, agonizing, and crucially, provided superb fodder for poetic verse. His objective was not to win her. It was to pine for her amidst a dignified, courteous torment. He would then swear absolute fealty to her, a pledge immensely advantageous to poets, yet profoundly uncomfortable for husbands. His solemn oaths combined a peculiar fusion of spiritual piety and intense personal theatrics. He committed to safeguarding her reputation, obeying her directives, cultivating moral rectitude, and if fate demanded, perishing gloriously in her service. Ideally, he would manage to avoid actual demise, but the omnipresent specter of it lent greater poetic weight to the entire elaborate construct. This fervent devotion permeated daily existence. A knight might bear her colors, a ribbon, a scarf, a scrap of fabric she had, in truth, never bestowed upon him, yet which he solemnly declared a sacred keepsake. He might excel remarkably in tourneys, subsequently proclaiming publicly that his triumph was wholly attributable to her inspiration. Should he suffer defeat, he would castigate himself for proving unworthy. A surprisingly significant portion of medieval emotional turmoil involved knights offering profound apologies to their ladies after being unseated from their mounts at considerable velocity. This yearning, indeed, evolved into a way of life. A knight adhering to the tenets of courtly love was perpetually expected to hover at the precipice of emotional disintegration, issuing theatrical sighs, assiduously composing verses, and gazing wistfully at the distant horizon, as though awaiting divine sanction to merely engage in conversation with the woman who ignited such profound anguish. Was this authentic love? Or was it self-imposed emotional turmoil? Could it be construed as a medieval precursor to modern fan culture, wherein the celebrated lady remained oblivious to her devoted following? Perhaps it was a synthesis of all three. Yet, the element of suffering remained paramount. Anguish served to demonstrate profound emotional depth. Rigorous self-restraint testified to virtue, and the inherent, irresistible chasm between knight and lady was the very essence that sustained the entire intricate system. Courtly love did not merely transform the nature of romantic affection. It inadvertently sculpted the very identity of the medieval knight. The tenets of chivalry, which prescribed courage, honor, and loyalty, were already integral to his existence. Yet, courtly love, added an entirely new dimension, emotional depth, or at least the convincing performance thereof. He was now expected not only to be a formidable warrior, but also a sensitive soul, capable of profound, albeit often unrequited, affection. This dual expectation created a fascinating tension between brute force and refined sentiment, often resolved in dramatic, if slightly absurd, poetry. The knight's devotion to his lady became a potent catalyst for self-improvement. He would strive for greater valor in battle, refine his manners, cultivate a more eloquent command of language, and even take rudimentary care of his appearance, all to prove himself worthy of her, despite the inherent impossibility of full reciprocation. His every action, from unhorsing a rival in a joust to composing a mournful ballad, was ostensibly in service to her ideal. This created a profound, almost spiritual connection between the knight and the distant, idealized figure of the lady, elevating his personal struggles into a grander, more noble narrative. However, this rigorous emotional performance also entailed considerable psychological strain. The knight was perpetually in a state of yearning, deliberately embracing a form of elegant torment. His emotional landscape was one of constant striving, frequent self-doubt, and the exquisite agony of proximity without possession. This was not a pursuit for the emotionally faint-hearted. Indeed, many a knight found himself verging on madness, driven to despair by the unattainable nature of his love, a despair that, ironically, only served to further elevate his romantic credentials in the eyes of his fellow poets, and presumably the ladies' gossiping handmaidens. Yet, for all its inherent paradoxes and dramatic excesses, courtly love provided a profound, albeit peculiar, framework for understanding human emotion within a rigid feudal society. It allowed for the expression of intense personal feeling within highly codified rules, offering an outlet for passion and individuality that might otherwise have been suppressed. It transformed the warrior into a poet, the brute into a courtier, and the simple act of yearning into an art form. And so, the medieval knight, in his shining armor, and with a heart burdened by a gloriously impossible love, became a figure of both formidable power and profound, theatrical vulnerability, eternally caught between the demands of battle and the exquisite torment of his unrequited affections.